The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage, casting long shadows across the empty rooms that would soon become home. Stood in the doorway of what would be the family living room, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, watching as the moving trucks pulled away down the gravel drive. The cottage, nestled within the grounds of Windsor Great Park, felt both intimate and overwhelming in its potential. William had already left for an early morning engagement, kissing her goodbye with promises to return by lunch to help with the unpacking. The children were at school, their excited chatter about the new house still echoing in her mind from breakfast. Now, in the quiet stillness, found herself alone with boxes, dreams, and the weight of creating something truly special. She walked through the rooms slowly, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Each space held possibility. The kitchen, with its cream-colored cabinets and large island, would be perfect for family meals and her mother's famous Christmas morning pancakes. The sitting room, with its cozy fireplace, would be ideal for intimate gatherings and quiet moments with her parents and siblings. Had always been hands-on when it came to creating homes. Even during their courtship, William had marveled at her ability to transform any space into something warm and welcoming. Now, with Christmas just 8 weeks away, she had set herself an ambitious goal: to make Adelaide Cottage not just a house, but a true family sanctuary where they could gather for their most intimate Christmas celebration yet. The decision to host her parents and James for Christmas had come naturally. After years of royal Christmases with their formal traditions and protocols, yearned for something different this year. She wanted her children to experience the kind of Christmas she had grown up with, one filled with her mother's homemade decorations, her father's terrible Christmas jokes, and the comfortable chaos that came with being surrounded by people who loved you unconditionally. As she opened the first box in the kitchen, her mind wandered to her childhood Christmases in. She remembered helping her mother wrap presents on the dining room table, the paper scattered everywhere as they laughed over inside jokes. She thought of Christmas morning walks with her father, Michael, when he would point out different birds and tell her stories about when he was young. Those memories had a warmth that she desperately wanted to recreate for George, Charlotte, and Louis. The cottage itself seemed to understand her vision. Built in the 1800s as a grace and favor home, it had housed many families over the decades, each leaving their own mark of love and life within its walls. Could feel that history as she moved through the rooms, and it comforted her. This wasn't just any house. It was a place where families had celebrated, grieved, grown, and loved for generations. She began with the kitchen, knowing that it would be the heart of their Christmas celebration. As she unpacked dishes and arranged them in the cabinets, mentally planned Christmas morning breakfast. Her mother would insist on making her special Christmas bread, the one with cranberries and orange zest that had become a family tradition. Her father would take charge of the coffee, measuring it out with the precision of someone who took his morning caffeine seriously. The afternoon passed quickly as lost herself in the rhythm of unpacking and arranging. Each item found its place as if the cottage was guiding her decisions. The family photos went on the mantelpiece in the sitting room, creating an instant gallery of memories. Wedding pictures sat alongside school photos, vacation snapshots next to formal portraits, creating a beautiful tapestry of their life together. As she worked, her phone buzzed periodically with messages from her family. Her mother sent pictures of Christmas decorations she was considering for the cottage, asking for her opinion on color schemes. Shared a recipe for mulled wine that she wanted to try Christmas Eve. James sent a silly photo of himself in a hat, already getting into the holiday spirit despite it being only October. These small interactions filled with warmth. Her family had always been her anchor, the constant source of love and normalcy in a life that had become anything but normal since joining the royal family. While she cherished her role and the privileges it brought, there were moments when she missed the simplicity of being just Kate, daughter of Michael and sister to and James. The sound of car doors slamming announced the return of her family. George, Charlotte, and Louis burst through the front door like a small hurricane, their school bags dropped carelessly in the entryway as they raced to explore their new home. Their excited voices filled the cottage with immediate life and energy. "Mummy, can my bedroom be the one with the window seat?" Charlotte called out, her voice carrying down from upstairs. "I want the room that looks out at the horses," George added, referring to the view of the royal stables visible from one of the bedroom windows. Louis, still young enough to be overwhelmed by change, appeared at side and wrapped his small arms around her legs. She lifted him up, breathing in his familiar scent of school lunch and playground adventures. "What do you think of our new house, little man?" she asked, carrying him toward the kitchen where she could hear William's voice as he examined the unpacked boxes. "It smells different," Louis said seriously, his small hand patting her cheek. "But good different." Laughed, understanding exactly what he meant. Every house had its own scent, its own personality. This cottage smelled of possibility, of fresh starts, of the wood polish the cleaning service had used to prepare it for their arrival. Soon, it would smell like their cooking, their life, their love. William appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie with one hand while reaching for Charlotte with the other as she launched herself at him. Even after all these years together, still felt that small flutter in her stomach when she saw him return home. He looked tired but happy, his face lighting up at the sight of his family gathered in their new kitchen. "How was the unpacking?" he asked, settling Charlotte on his hip while examining the progress it made. "Good," she said, watching as George began investigating the contents of a box labeled kitchen gadgets. "I think this place is going to be perfect for Christmas with my family." William's smile softened. He understood how important this was to her, how much she missed the informal intimacy of family gatherings. His own family's Christmas traditions were beautiful but formal, steeped in centuries of protocol and public expectation. This Christmas at Adelaide Cottage would be different, smaller, more personal, more theirs. "What can I help with?" he asked, and felt her heart swell with gratitude for his willingness to dive into the domestic chaos of moving and holiday planning. As the evening progressed, the family worked together to make the cottage feel like home. George and Charlotte claimed their bedrooms and began the important work of deciding where their treasures would go. Louis helped arrange books on the living room shelves, his contribution mostly consisting of putting books in backwards and sideways, but his enthusiasm was infectious. During dinner, takeaway pizza eaten on boxes in the living room since the dining table was still buried under moving supplies, shared her vision for Christmas with the family. She described Christmas morning in pajamas, opening presents around the tree in the sitting room. She talked about Christmas Eve dinner with her parents, and James served in their new dining room with candles and her grandmother's china. "Will Granny and Grandpa Cambridge come too?" George asked, using his childhood name for his paternal grandparents. And William exchanged glances. This was one of the delicate balances they constantly navigated, honoring both families while creating their own traditions. "They'll be at with all the cousins," William explained gently. "But we'll see them for Boxing Day, and we'll call them Christmas morning to share our celebrations." George nodded, satisfied with this explanation. At 9, he was beginning to understand the complex family dynamics that came with being royal, but he was still young enough to accept change as an adventure rather than a burden. After the children were settled in their new bedrooms, and William sat together on the living room floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the debris of their first day in the new house. The cottage was quiet except for the settling sounds of an old house and the distant murmur of traffic on the Windsor Castle grounds. "Are you sure about Christmas?" William asked softly, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's a lot of pressure to put on yourself, creating the perfect family Christmas in a brand new house." Leaned into his touch, considering his words. There was pressure, certainly. She wanted everything to be perfect for her parents, for her children, for William. She wanted to prove that they could create something beautiful and intimate without the grandeur and formality that usually surrounded their lives. But as she looked around the cottage, with its cozy proportions and welcoming atmosphere, she felt confident in her choice. This wasn't about creating perfection. It was about creating connection. It was about giving her children memories of Christmas mornings that smelled like her mother's baking and sounded like her father's laughter. It was about showing them that home wasn't about how grand or formal a place was, but about who filled it with love. "I'm sure," she said finally, taking his hand in hers. "This is going to be exactly what we all need." Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the trees surrounding Adelaide Cottage, and could almost imagine she heard the whispers of all the families who had lived here before, encouraging her in her quest to make this house a home. Christmas was still weeks away, but already she could feel the magic beginning to build, box by unpacked box, room by arranged room, dream by carefully planned dream. 3 weeks had passed since the move to Adelaide Cottage, and the house was beginning to feel like home. Stood in her bedroom window, watching the morning frost sparkle on the grass outside. The cottage had settled into their family rhythm beautifully, with each room now bearing the comfortable marks of daily life. School bags hung by the front door, William's reading glasses sat on the kitchen counter, and Charlotte's latest art projects decorated the refrigerator. Today marked the beginning of serious Christmas preparation phase. She had spent the previous evening making detailed lists, planning everything from menu items to decoration themes. Her notebook, filled with her careful handwriting, sat open on the kitchen table next to her morning tea. The sight of it filled her with both excitement and a flutter of nervous energy. The phone rang just as she was reviewing her timeline for the day. Her mother's familiar voice filled the kitchen with warmth. "Good morning, darling. I hope I'm not calling too early. I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about Christmas at your new house, and I have so many ideas." Smiled, settling into her favorite chair by the kitchen window. Enthusiasm for family celebrations was infectious, one of the many qualities had inherited from her mother. "You're never too early, Mum. I was just going over my plans for today. I want to start the decorating process, and I could really use your input." "Well, I've been thinking," continued, and could picture her mother moving around her own kitchen probably already dressed and ready for the day despite the early hour. "What if we made this year's theme more personal? Instead of buying everything new, we could incorporate things that have meaning to our family. Maybe some of the decorations from your childhood, mixed with new things that represent this new chapter." The suggestion touched deeply. She had grown up with her mother's Christmas decorations, many of which had made herself or collected during the family's travels when and her siblings were young. The idea of bringing those treasures into their new home felt like weaving together past and present in the most beautiful way. "That's perfect, Mum. Would you mind if I came over later this week to look through the Christmas boxes? I'd love to choose some special pieces." "I was hoping you'd ask. Your father's already been up in the attic, organizing everything. He found the wooden nativity set your grandfather carved, the one you always insisted on setting up in your bedroom when you were little." His breath caught. She had forgotten about that nativity set, carved by her paternal grandfather when she was just 5 years old. It was simple and rustic, nothing like the elaborate Christmas displays she was accustomed to now, but it held more meaning than any expensive decoration ever could. After ending the call with plans to visit the following afternoon, threw herself into the day's tasks. Her first stop was the spare bedroom that would serve as her Christmas preparation headquarters. She had claimed the room as her own space for planning and crafting, and already it was beginning to look like a workshop crossed with an interior designer's studio. Fabric samples lay scattered across the desk she had positioned by the window, each one representing a different element of her Christmas vision. Deep forest greens and rich burgundy for the dining room, soft golds and creams for the living room, and bright, cheerful reds for the children's areas. She had always believed that Christmas decorating should tell a story, and this year's story was about family, tradition, and new beginnings. His approach to decorating had evolved significantly since her marriage. In the early years, she had deferred to palace staff and traditional royal Christmas customs. But as she had grown more confident in her role and more certain of her own style, she had begun to assert her personal preferences. This year, with the freedom of their own family home, she could fully express her vision. The morning was spent researching and ordering supplies online. Had learned to be strategic about royal family purchases, always mindful of public perception, and the need to support British businesses when possible. She carefully selected items from small, local artisans and family-owned businesses, knowing that her choices would have real impact on these entrepreneurs. She ordered hand-blown glass ornaments from a glassmaker in the Cotswolds, their delicate beauty perfect for the elegant simplicity she envisioned. From a small farm in Scotland, she selected a wreath made of native evergreens and heather, its rustic charm ideal for their cottage's front door. Each purchase felt intentional and meaningful, building toward a celebration that would reflect both royal elegance and personal warmth. By noon, had worked up quite an appetite for lunch, but more importantly, she had worked up an excitement for the afternoon's activity, a solo shopping trip to Windsor's charming town center. It had been months since she had been able to browse shops without a full security detail, and today presented a rare opportunity for some independence. The weather had warmed slightly, making it a perfect day for walking through the historic streets of Windsor. Chose her outfit carefully, dark jeans, a cream cashmere sweater, and a chocolate brown jacket that would allow her to blend in with other shoppers. She pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail and chose minimal makeup, hoping to maintain some anonymity during her outing. Windsor's town center during a weekday was relatively quiet, filled mostly with locals running errands and a few tourists admiring the ancient architecture. Felt a familiar thrill at being able to move through the world normally, even if she knew her protection officer was discreetly nearby. Her first stop was an antique shop that specialized in vintage Christmas items. The elderly proprietor, Mrs. Henley, recognized her immediately, but treated her with the kind of warm, respectful familiarity that treasured. Mrs. Henley had been running the shop for 40 years and had an encyclopedic knowledge of Christmas traditions from around the world. "I'm looking for something special," explained, running her fingers along a display of vintage ornaments. "We're hosting an intimate family Christmas for the first time in our new home, and I want to find pieces that will become new family heirlooms." Mrs. Henley's eyes lit up with understanding. She disappeared into the back room and emerged carrying a wooden box. "I've been saving these for someone who would truly appreciate them," she said, opening the box to reveal a set of hand-carved Christmas angels, each one unique and bearing the patina of age. Lifted one of the angels, marveling at the craftsmanship. The wings were delicately detailed and the facial expressions were serene and joyful. "They're beautiful. What's their history?" "They were carved by a local artisan in the 1940s, just after the war. A young father made them for his children's first peacetime Christmas. The family kept them for generations, but recently decided they wanted them to go to a family that would treasure them." The story moved profoundly. The idea that these angels had watched over other families during their Christmas celebrations, that they carried the love and hopes of previous generations, made them infinitely more precious than any new decoration could be. "I'll take them," she said without hesitation, already imagining them adorning the mantelpiece in the cottage's sitting room. Her next stop was a small that specialized in children's literature. Had decided that this Christmas would include new book traditions, with each family member receiving a special Christmas book that would be read aloud during the holiday. She wanted to select stories that would become part of their family's Christmas legacy. The shopkeeper, a young woman named Sarah, was a literature graduate who had recently opened her store with the dream of connecting families with beautiful stories. Spent nearly an hour browsing, selecting books with care and consideration. A beautifully illustrated version of The Night Before Christmas for Louis, who was just beginning to love longer stories. A collection of Christmas stories from around the world for Charlotte, who was fascinated by different cultures. And for George, an adventure story set during a Christmas holiday, perfect for his developing love of exciting tales. For the adults, she chose a beautiful coffee table book about Christmas traditions in English country homes, filled with photographs and stories that she knew her parents would love. It would serve as both entertainment and inspiration for future Christmases. As the afternoon progressed, found herself completely absorbed in the joy of preparation. Each purchase, each decision, each small detail was building toward something magical. She stopped at a cheese shop to order special items for Christmas Eve dinner, at a bakery to discuss custom Christmas morning pastries, and at a florist to plan arrangements that would bring nature's beauty indoors. The florist was particularly excited about Svision. They spent long minutes discussing how to incorporate seasonal flowers and greenery in ways that would complement rather than overwhelm the cottage's intimate spaces. Described her desire for arrangements that would smell like Christmas, pine and eucalyptus, cinnamon and cloves, and eyes sparkled with creative possibilities. "What about creating small, personal arrangements for each guest bedroom?" suggested. "Something they'll see first thing when they wake up Christmas morning, letting them know how special they are to your family." Loved the idea immediately. Her parents would each have their own rooms at the cottage, and James would stay in the converted study. Small, thoughtful touches like individual floral arrangements would make each of them feel treasured and welcomed. By late afternoon, Z's arms were full of packages, and her heart was full of anticipation. She had accomplished more than she had hoped, and everything was falling into place beautifully. As she walked back toward where her car was parked, she caught sight of her reflection in a shop window and was struck by how happy she looked. This kind of hands-on preparation, this attention to detail and personal touch, felt more authentically herself than many of the formal events that filled her royal calendar. The drive back to Adelaide Cottage took her through the most beautiful parts of Windsor Great Park, where the autumn colors were reaching their peak. The trees seemed to be putting on their own celebration, dressed in golds and reds that rivaled any Christmas decoration. Found herself thinking about how lucky her children were to grow up in this setting, surrounded by natural beauty and steeped in history, yet free to create their own family traditions. When she arrived home, the cottage welcomed her with lights glowing in the windows and the sound of her family's voices carrying from the kitchen. William was helping the children with homework while simultaneously starting dinner, a scene of beautiful domestic chaos that made hearts swell with contentment. "How was your shopping expedition?" William asked, kissing her hello while stirring something that smelled deliciously like his famous pasta sauce. Began unpacking her treasures, sharing the story of each purchase. The children gathered around as she showed them the carved angels, their faces lighting up with wonder at the thought of these special decorations joining their family traditions. "Can we put them up now?" Charlotte asked, already reaching for one of the angels. "Not quite yet, sweetheart, but soon. Christmas decorating is like telling a story. We have to wait for the right moment to begin each chapter." As the family gathered around the dinner table that evening, felt a deep sense of satisfaction settling over her. The cottage continued to reveal its welcoming nature, seeming to embrace each new addition to their Christmas preparations. Outside, the first real frost of the season was beginning to form on the grass, a reminder that the holiday season was truly approaching. After dinner, while William supervised bath time, retreated to her planning room to update her lists and timelines. Everything was progressing beautifully, even better than she had hoped. Tomorrow would bring new tasks and new excitement, but tonight she allowed herself a moment to appreciate how perfectly everything was falling into place. Looking around the cottage, with its comfortable furniture and growing collection of personal touches, felt the kind of deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what felt right. This Christmas was going to be everything she had dreamed of and more. The November rain drummed steadily against the windows of Adelaide Cottage as sat cross-legged on the floor of the sitting room, surrounded by boxes of Christmas decorations. Some were newly purchased treasures from her shopping expedition. Others were carefully preserved family heirlooms that her mother had brought over the day before. The contrast between old and new created a tapestry of memories and possibilities that filled with anticipation. It was early Saturday morning, and the rest of the family was still sleeping. Had always been an early riser, but during Christmas preparation season, she found herself waking even earlier, her mind already buzzing with plans and excitement. These quiet morning hours had become her favorite time, when she could work on the more delicate aspects of decorating without little hands eager to help with everything. She lifted a tissue-wrapped ornament from one of her mother's boxes, carefully peeling away the layers to reveal a small knitted robin that she had made in primary school. The stitches were uneven, the colors slightly faded, but it represented one of her earliest attempts at creating something beautiful for Christmas. Had saved it all these years, along with similar creations from and James, understanding instinctively that these imperfect handmade treasures would become infinitely more valuable than any store-bought decoration. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced that her peaceful solitude was about to end. George appeared first, his hair sticking up in all directions, followed closely by Charlotte, who was already fully dressed despite the early hour. Louis padded behind them in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes but drawn by the excitement of seeing the Christmas decorations spread across the floor. "Can we help, Mummy?" Charlotte asked, settling herself carefully among the boxes. At 7, she had inherited love of organization and attention to detail, often insisting on helping with household projects. "Of course, sweetheart, but we need to be very gentle with some of these things. Some of them belong to your great-grandparents, and some are very old and special." George picked up one of the carved angels from Mrs. Henley's shop, turning it over in his hands with the careful reverence that had taught him to show for precious things. "Tell us the story again about the man who made these after the war." Settled back against the sofa cushions, gathering Louis into her lap as she recounted the tale of the woodcarver who had created beautiful things to celebrate peace and family after years of conflict. The children listened with the kind of focused attention they reserved for their favorite stories, understanding instinctively that these objects carried meaning beyond their simple beauty. William appeared in the doorway with a tray of tea and toast, his hair damp from the shower and his weekend clothes casual and comfortable. Saturday mornings at Adelaide Cottage had quickly become his favorite time of the week. No official engagements, no formal schedule, just their family enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. "It looks like Christmas exploded in here," he said with a grin, carefully stepping over boxes to set the tray on the coffee table. "In the best possible way," replied, accepting her tea gratefully. The warmth spread through her hands, chasing away the November chill that seemed to permeate even the coziest corners of the cottage. They spent the morning sorting through decorations, with explaining the story behind each piece. The children were fascinated by the history embedded in their family's Christmas collection. A silver bell that had belonged to great-grandmother, ornaments collected during family holidays to France and Scotland, hand-painted baubles created by their cousins during craft sessions at. "I want to make some decorations too," Louis announced, his small voice serious with purpose. "For our new house Christmas." His heart swelled at his words. This was exactly what she had hoped for, that the children would feel ownership in creating their family's Christmas traditions, that they would understand the joy of making beautiful things with their own hands. "That's a wonderful idea. What kind of decorations would you like to make?" Louis considered this carefully, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "Something for the tree, something that shows we live here now." "Paper snowflakes," Charlotte suggested. "We could cut them out and write the year on them." George nodded enthusiastically. "And we could make salt dough ornaments like we did at school last year." William caught eye over the children's heads, his expression soft with understanding. He recognized the significance of this moment, their children choosing to create new traditions while honoring the old ones, understanding instinctively that the best family celebrations were built on layers of love and memory. The afternoon was spent in delightful creative chaos. The dining room table was covered with brown paper as the children drew designs for their ornaments. Had retrieved her craft supplies from the planning room, and soon the family was deeply engaged in cutting, gluing, painting, and creating. Charlotte worked with characteristic precision, creating delicate paper angels with carefully cut wings. George focused on painting wooden ornaments he had cut from craft wood, his tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated on getting the details exactly right. Louis, with help from, pressed his handprints into salt dough that would be baked into permanent keepsakes. William, initially claiming he had no artistic talent, found himself surprisingly absorbed in creating a wooden star for the top of their tree. He carved it carefully from a piece of oak, his movements precise and meditative. Watched him work, remembering how his hands had always been skilled at delicate tasks, whether he was adjusting a flower in her hair on their wedding day or helping George build elaborate Lego constructions. "This reminds me of when we first moved in together at Anglesey," said, settling beside him at the table. "Do you remember how we spent that first Christmas Eve making decorations because we hadn't had time to buy any?" William's face lit up with the memory. "You insisted we needed a tree even though we were only going to be there for 2 days before flying too. We drove all over the island looking for one small enough to fit in our tiny sitting room. And you complained the entire time about pine needles in your car," laughed, reaching over to brush a small wood shaving from his sweater. "But it was perfect, wasn't it? Just the two of us making it up as we went along." "Just like this," said softly, gesturing around their current creative chaos. The afternoon flew by in a blur of paint and glue, laughter and gentle guidance as the children worked on their projects. Found herself mentally cataloging these moments, understanding that they were creating memories that would last far longer than any of the decorations they were making. Years from now, when George, Charlotte, and Louis were adults with children of their own, they would remember this rainy November afternoon when they helped transform their new house into a Christmas home. As tea time approached, they cleaned up their supplies and admired their collective handiwork. The dining room table now held dozens of new ornaments, each one unique and precious because it had been made with love by their family's hands. "Can we put them on the tree now?" George asked, eyeing the bare evergreen that William had set up in the sitting room the night before. "Let's wait until tomorrow," suggested. "Tonight, we'll let all the painted pieces dry completely, and tomorrow we'll have a proper tree decorating ceremony." The children accepted this delay with good grace, understanding that the anticipation was part of the joy. Had learned this lesson from her own mother, that rushing through Christmas preparations robbed them of their magic, that taking time to savor each step made the final celebration more meaningful. That evening, after the children were settled in their beds with stories read and songs sung, and William sat together in the sitting room, planning the following day's decorating strategy. The bare tree stood in the corner like a patient sentinel, waiting to be transformed. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," William said, his arm around as they shared the sofa. About this being like our first Christmas at Anglesey, there's something special about creating traditions from scratch, isn't there? Nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. When we follow established traditions, they're beautiful and meaningful, but there's something powerful about choosing our own path, about deciding what matters to our family specifically. The children seemed to understand that. Did you see how seriously Louis took making his handprint ornaments? And the way Charlotte organized all the supplies before we even started? They're building their own memories of what Christmas should feel like, agreed. Not just receiving traditions, but actively creating them. Outside, the November rain had softened to a gentle mist, and through the sitting room windows, they could see lights beginning to twinkle in the windows of distant houses across the Windsor grounds. Other families were beginning their own Christmas preparations, creating their own versions of the magic that would culminate in celebration and joy. Felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she looked around their sitting room. The morning's boxes had been unpacked and organized, their contents either displayed on shelves and mantels or carefully stored for tree decorating the next day. The cottage felt ready for its first Christmas, welcoming and warm despite the chill outside. "Do you think your parents will like what we're creating here?" William asked, his voice thoughtful. "It's so different from Christmas at or." Considered the question carefully. "I think they'll love it because it's ours, because we're putting our hearts into making it special. Mum especially will appreciate all the little details, all the thought we're putting into making everyone feel welcomed and cherished." "And your father?" "Dad will love having a front row seat to watch his experience Christmas magic. You know how he gets during the holidays, like a big kid himself." William smiled, having witnessed Michael's Christmas enthusiasm firsthand during previous celebrations. And James. "They'll love being part of creating something new. We're all old enough now to appreciate how precious these family times are, how important it is to make the most of them." As they prepared for bed, took one last look around the cottage. Tomorrow would bring the joy of decorating their tree, of seeing their handmade ornaments nestled among family heirlooms and new treasures. But tonight, she was content to appreciate the progress they had made, the way their house was gradually transforming into a true family home. Upstairs, she checked on each child before settling into her own bed. George had arranged his painted ornaments carefully on his bedside table, ready for the next day's festivities. Charlotte had left a note for the morning. "Remember to take pictures of the tree decorating?" Louis slept peacefully, his small hands still faintly stained with paint from the day's creative activities. This was exactly what I'd hoped for when she decided to host Christmas at Adelaide Cottage. Not perfection, but connection. Not formal beauty, but authentic joy. Not inherited traditions, but lovingly created new ones that would carry their family forward into future Christmases with warmth and meaning. Tomorrow would bring new preparations, new excitement, new steps toward the Christmas celebration that was taking shape one careful decision at a time. But tonight, fell asleep to the sound of wind in the trees around their cottage, carrying with it the promise of winter and the magic that was building one handmade ornament, one family moment, one loving choice at a time. December had arrived at Adelaide Cottage with a crisp clarity that made every morning feel full of possibility. Stood at her bedroom window, watching the first proper frost of winter transform the cottage garden into a crystalline wonderland. In 3 weeks, her family would gather here for Christmas, and suddenly the timeline that had seemed so generous was beginning to feel deliciously urgent. Today was the day she had been both anticipating and slightly dreading, the arrival of the cottage's first Christmas tree. Not just any tree, but the perfect tree that would serve as the centerpiece of their intimate family celebration. Had spent considerable time researching sustainable tree farms within driving distance of Windsor, finally settling on a small family operation in the Cotswolds that specialized in traditionally grown spruces and firs. William had offered to handle the tree selection, but had insisted on making the trip herself. This wasn't about convenience, it was about connection. She wanted to choose their tree with her own eyes and hands, to understand its character and personality before bringing it home to become part of their family's Christmas story. The drive through the Cotswold countryside was spectacular, with winter sunlight streaming through bare tree branches and illuminating frost-covered fields that sparkled like scattered diamonds. Had chosen to take their personal car rather than an official vehicle, savoring these opportunities for normalcy that had become more precious since moving to Adelaide Cottage. Family Tree Farm was exactly what it hoped for, a working farm where Christmas trees were clearly a labor of love rather than simply a commercial enterprise. Mrs., a woman in her 70s with soil under her fingernails and an encyclopedic knowledge of evergreen varieties, greeted with the kind of warm professionalism that put her immediately at ease. "You mentioned on the phone that you're looking for something special," Mrs. said, leading through rows of carefully tended trees. "Tell me about your space and what kind of feeling you want to create." Found herself describing not just the physical dimensions of the cottage's sitting room, but the emotional atmosphere she hoped to achieve. She talked about wanting a tree that would feel magical to her children, but not overwhelming in their intimate space. She mentioned the handmade ornaments they had created together, the family heirlooms that would join new treasures, the desire for something that would photograph beautifully but feel authentic rather than staged. Mrs. listened with the attention of someone who understood that Christmas trees were about much more than decoration. "I think I have exactly what you need," she said finally, leading toward a section of the farm where slightly smaller trees grew in perfect symmetry. The tree that caught attention immediately was a 6-foot Norway spruce with branches that seemed to reach out like welcoming arms. Its shape was classic without being rigid, full without being overpowering. When walked around it, examining its silhouette from all angles, she could envision it perfectly in their sitting room corner, tall enough to impress the children but proportioned to maintain the cottage's cozy intimacy. "This one has perfect character," Mrs. observed, running her weathered hands along the tree's branches. "Strong enough to hold plenty of ornaments but graceful, and see how the branches are spaced? That will give you room to display your special pieces so each one can be properly appreciated." Made her decision immediately. This tree felt right, the same way Adelaide Cottage had felt right from the moment she walked through its doors. Sometimes the heart simply knew. While Mrs. Grandson prepared the tree for transport, wrapping its base and securing it properly, explored the farm's small gift shop. She discovered locally made tree toppers, handcrafted by artisans in nearby villages. One in particular caught her eye, a delicate silver star embedded with small crystals that would catch and reflect the sitting room's firelight beautifully. The drive back to Windsor was filled with the piney scent of fresh evergreen and growing excitement about the evening ahead. She had planned a tree decorating ceremony that would become one of their family's foundational Christmas memories, complete with special music, homemade hot chocolate, and the first lighting of their cottage's Christmas tree. William was waiting in the driveway when she arrived, along with George, Charlotte, and Louis, who had been watching for her return with barely contained excitement. The sight of the tree strapped to the car's roof elicited cheers and immediate requests to help with the installation process. Setting up the tree became a family project that filled the afternoon with laughter and gentle chaos. William handled the technical aspects, ensuring the trunk was straight and the tree was securely positioned, while supervised the children's eager assistance. Even Louis, at 4, insisted on helping by handing William tools and offering detailed advice about tree positioning. "Is it straight, Mummy?" Charlotte asked for the 4th time, her head tilted as she studied the tree's angle with the seriousness of an art critic. "It's perfect, sweetheart, absolutely perfect." And it truly was. The tree filled the sitting room corner with presence and promise, its branches reaching toward the ceiling while leaving plenty of space for the family to gather around it. The afternoon light filtering through the cottage windows caught the tree's needles and created dancing shadows on the walls, bringing immediate life and energy to the room. While William vacuumed up the inevitable pine needles, retreated to the kitchen to prepare for the evening's ceremony. She had planned every detail carefully, understanding that this first tree decorating at Adelaide Cottage would set the tone for Christmases to come. The hot chocolate was made from scratch using a recipe her mother had taught her years ago, rich with real cream and a hint of cinnamon that would make the cottage smell like Christmas morning. She prepared a tray of homemade gingerbread cookies that the children had helped bake the previous weekend, their imperfect shapes and enthusiastic icing applications making them infinitely more precious than any store-bought alternative. As evening approached, gathered all the decorations they had collected and created over the past weeks. The carved angels from Mrs. Henley's shop were carefully arranged on a silver tray, ready to take their place of honor on the tree's most prominent branches. The children's handmade ornaments were grouped by creator, allowing each child to have the satisfaction of placing their own creations on the tree. The family heirlooms from his collection were unwrapped one more time, each piece carrying its own story and significance. Had decided that this year, instead of simply hanging decorations, she would tell the story behind each ornament as it found its place on the tree, creating a narrative that would help the children understand their family's history and their place within it. When darkness finally settled over the cottage and the sitting room lamps cast their warm glow, called her family together for what she privately thought of as their first official family ceremony at Adelaide Cottage. The tree stood ready in its corner, bare but beautiful, waiting to be transformed. "Before we start decorating," said, gathering the children around her on the sitting room carpet, "I want us to think about what this tree represents. It's not just decoration, it's going to be the center of our Christmas celebration. Every ornament we put on it is going to hold our memories and our love." George raised his hand as if he were in school. "Will the tree remember Christmas after we take it down?" His heart melted at the question, so perfectly childlike in its magical thinking, and so profound in its understanding of how objects could hold meaning beyond their physical existence. "In a way, yes," she said carefully. "Even after this tree goes back to nature, the memories we make decorating it and celebrating around it will last forever, and the ornaments will be carefully saved so they can tell this story again next Christmas and the Christmas after that." William began the ceremony by placing the star topper, lifting Charlotte so she could help guide it into position. The silver star caught the lamplight immediately, casting tiny rainbows across the ceiling and drawing gasps of delight from the children. Then came the careful process of hanging each ornament, with telling stories as she went. The robin she had knitted in primary school prompted tales of her childhood Christmases in. The carved angels sparked discussion about the importance of peace and family. Each of the children's handmade creations was celebrated and admired before finding its perfect spot on the tree. Louis took his role as official ornament handler very seriously, carefully carrying each decoration to whoever would be hanging it and offering detailed suggestions about placement. His enthusiasm was infectious, and soon the entire family was debating the merits of different branch positions with the gravity of art curators arranging a museum exhibition. As the tree filled with decorations, the sitting room transformed into something truly magical. The combination of lamplight, firelight, and the tree's twinkling fairy lights created an atmosphere of warmth and enchantment that felt both intimate and celebratory. Found herself pausing frequently to simply absorb the moment, understanding that she was experiencing exactly what she had hoped for when she decided to host Christmas at the cottage. The ceremony concluded with the lighting of the tree, a moment had saved for last despite the children's repeated requests to plug in the lights earlier. William dimmed all the other lights in the room, leaving only the fireplace to provide illumination. Then, with great ceremony, plugged in the tree lights. The effect was breathtaking. The tree blazed to life, its white lights creating depth and dimension among the ornaments while casting a warm glow that made the entire room feel like a Christmas card come to life. The carved angels seemed to dance in the flickering light. The children's handmade decorations looked professional and beautiful, and the overall effect was everything had envisioned and more. The children's gasps of wonder and delight were followed by spontaneous applause, and felt tears prick at her eyes. This was what Christmas was supposed to feel like, not formal or obligatory, but joyful and magical and full of love. They spent the rest of the evening in the sitting room, sipping hot chocolate and admiring their handiwork while Christmas music played softly in the background. William built up the fire, creating the perfect complement to the tree's gentle glow, and the children arranged themselves on the carpet with books and quiet toys, content to simply be in the magical space they had created together. "It's the most beautiful tree ever," Charlotte declared solemnly, curled against side on the sofa. "I think you're absolutely right," agreed, stroking her daughter's hair while gazing at their creation. Later that evening, after the children had been tucked into bed with extra stories to commemorate the special day, and William sat together in the twinkling light of their tree, planning the final weeks of Christmas preparation. 3 weeks until Christmas Eve," William said, his arm around as they shared the sofa where they had watched their children's wonder unfold earlier. 3 weeks until your parents and James arrive," corrected. "Christmas starts the moment family walks through that door." "Are you nervous?" he asked, his voice gentle with understanding. considered the question honestly. There were certainly details still to be finalized, preparations still to be completed, and the natural anxiety that came with hosting any important family celebration. But underneath those surface concerns was a deep well of confidence and joy. "Not nervous," she said finally. "Excited, eager, ready to show them what we've created here." Looking around the sitting room, with its perfect tree glowing in the corner and the cottage's welcoming atmosphere embracing them both, felt the profound satisfaction of dreams taking shape in reality. Tomorrow would bring new tasks and new preparations, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by the love and beauty her family had created together, one ornament, one tradition, one magical moment at a time. Christmas Eve morning dawned crisp and clear at Adelaide Cottage, with the kind of winter sunlight that made everything sparkle as if the world had been dusted with diamonds during the night. Woke earlier than usual, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and anticipation that reminded her of Christmas mornings from her own childhood. Today, her family would arrive, and the weeks of careful preparation would finally bloom into the intimate celebration she had dreamed of creating. The cottage felt ready. Every room had been polished to perfection, every detail carefully arranged to create an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the sitting room corner, its twinkling lights casting dancing shadows that had become a source of constant delight for the children. Fresh greenery adorned the mantelpieces, filling the air with the crisp scent of pine and eucalyptus. The guest bedrooms were prepared with the personal touches had planned. Fresh flowers, carefully selected books, and small gifts that would make each family member feel treasured and welcomed. Moved through the cottage in the early morning quiet, making final adjustments, and simply absorbing the peaceful beauty of their Christmas home. In the kitchen, she reviewed her timeline for the day one last time, checking off completed tasks and confirming the schedule that would bring her family together for their first Adelaide Cottage Christmas celebration. Her mother and father were driving over from mid-morning, planning to arrive in time for lunch and an afternoon of relaxed family time before the evening's festivities began. Would arrive later in the afternoon with her Christmas Eve contribution, a pavlova recipe she had been perfecting for weeks. James was driving down from London after finishing his morning commitments, promising to arrive by tea time with his famous Christmas Eve music playlist and his legendary ability to keep the children entertained. William appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas, but carrying a tray with tea and toast. Their Saturday morning ritual had evolved into a daily comfort during the weeks of Christmas preparation, a quiet moment of connection before the day's activities began in earnest. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling beside her at the kitchen table and studying her face with the careful attention of someone who knew her moods and expressions intimately. "Perfect," said and realized she meant it completely. Not nervous, not worried, just perfect, ready. The children's excited voices carried down from upstairs, where they were already awake and discussing the day's anticipated events with the detailed planning of military strategists. George had appointed himself the official family greeter, responsible for watching for cars and announcing arrivals. Charlotte had claimed responsibility for showing everyone their Christmas tree and explaining the story behind each ornament. Louis, in his 4-year-old wisdom, had decided his job was to make sure everyone got enough hugs. After breakfast, the family threw themselves into the final preparations with the kind of joyful energy that made work feel like celebration. William supervised the children's room tidying while focused on the kitchen, preparing elements of the evening meal that could be done in advance. The cottage filled with the sounds of Christmas music, laughter, and the comfortable chaos of a family working together toward a shared goal. At 11:30, George's excited shout from the sitting room window announced the first arrival. "Granny and Grandpa are here. Their car is coming up the drive." Felt her heart leap with pure joy as she wiped her hands on her apron and hurried toward the front door. Through the window, she could see her parents' familiar blue estate car navigating the cottage's gravel drive, and suddenly all the weeks of preparation crystallized into this perfect moment of welcome. Emerged from the passenger seat with her arms full of wrapped packages and her face bright with excitement. Michael followed, unloading additional bags and boxes with the patient efficiency that characterized his approach to family gatherings. They both paused for a moment to look up at Adelaide Cottage, taking in its welcoming facade and the Christmas wreath had hung on the front door. The reunion was everything it hoped for: warm embraces, excited children dancing around their grandparents, and the immediate sense of family completeness that came when the people you loved most gathered in one place. And Michael were effusive in their admiration for the cottage, exclaiming over every carefully planned detail from the fresh flowers in the entryway to the Christmas tree visible through the sitting room doorway. "Darling, it's absolutely magical," said, pulling her daughter into another hug as they stood in the cottage's cozy front hall. "You've created something truly special here." Michael nodded his agreement, his eyes already twinkling with the Christmas spirit that transformed him from reserved businessman into enthusiastic grandfather every December. "It feels like home already," he said, his simple words carrying deep meaning for. The morning flew by in a blur of house tour, present hiding, and the comfortable catching up that happened when family gathered after time apart. Watched her parents explore each room of the cottage with genuine interest and delight, understanding instinctively how much thought and love had gone into every detail. Lunch was served in the cottage's dining room, with the good china had chosen specifically for family meals and flowers that caught the winter sunlight streaming through the windows. The conversation flowed easily, covering everything from the children's school activities to William's recent engagements to the family's plans for the new year. This was the kind of relaxed family time that had missed during formal Christmas celebrations. No protocol, no schedule beyond their own desires, just the simple pleasure of being together. Arrival in the early afternoon brought a new wave of excitement and energy. She burst through the front door with her characteristic enthusiasm, immediately gathering the children into hugs and exclaiming over the cottage's transformation since her last visit. Her pavlova was a work of art, decorated with winter berries and crystallized flowers that made it as beautiful as any professional creation. "Kate, this place is absolutely perfect," she said, linking arms with as they walked through the cottage together. "I can feel how happy you are here, how right this all feels." James's arrival just before tea time completed the family circle. He came bearing gifts, stories, and the kind of infectious good humor that made him every child's favorite uncle. Within minutes of walking through the door, he had Louis on his shoulders and was leading an impromptu parade through the cottage while Charlotte and George provided musical accompaniment with wooden spoons and saucepans. As evening approached, the cottage settled into the magical rhythm had envisioned. The sitting room became the heart of their celebration, with the Christmas tree providing gentle illumination while the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls. The family gathered naturally around the room, Michael and on the sofa, William in his favorite chair, the children arranged on the carpet with their various treasures, and in James claiming the window seat where they could admire the cottage garden in the fatting light. Moved between kitchen and sitting room, putting finishing touches on their Christmas Eve dinner while keeping one ear on the family conversation. The cottage's open layout made it easy to be part of both activities, and she found herself feeling grateful for the 1,000th time for the home's welcoming design. Dinner was served by candlelight in the dining room, creating an atmosphere of intimate celebration that felt both special and wonderfully relaxed. Had chosen the menu carefully, traditional enough to feel like Christmas, but simple enough to allow her to actually enjoy the meal rather than stress about preparation. Her mother had contributed her famous Christmas bread, had prepared a winter salad that looked like edible artwork, and James had surprised everyone by arriving with homemade Christmas crackers filled with family jokes and personalized gifts. The children were allowed to stay up later than usual, understanding instinctively that this was a special evening that called for relaxed rules. Louis fell asleep in his grandfather's lap during after-dinner stories, while George and Charlotte participated in the adult conversation with the confidence of children who knew they were valued members of the family circle. As the evening wound toward bedtime, found herself standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her family gathered in the sitting room's twinkling light. William was showing Michael something on his phone while they shared a whispered conversation about photography, was helping Charlotte arrange ornaments on the lower branches of the tree, both of them absorbed in the important work of perfect placement. James was teaching George a complicated card trick while documented the lesson with her camera. This was exactly what it envisioned when she decided to host Christmas at Adelaide Cottage. Not formal perfection, but authentic connection. Not duty-bound tradition, but chosen celebration. Not obligation, but joy. The cottage itself seemed to embrace their family gathering, its rooms warm and welcoming despite the December cold outside. Every carefully chosen detail, from the handmade ornaments to the fresh flowers to the comfortable furniture arrangements, contributed to an atmosphere that felt both magical and utterly natural. When bedtime finally arrived, the process of settling everyone for the night became its own gentle celebration. The children were tucked into their beds with extra stories and songs, their excitement about Christmas morning barely contained by exhaustion. The adults lingered over final cups of tea and quiet conversation, reluctant to end the perfect day. Parents settled into the guest room that had prepared with special care, exclaiming over the fresh flowers and the small touches that showed how much their visit meant. Claimed the cozy bedroom overlooking the cottage garden, immediately declaring it the most peaceful room she had ever stayed in. James made himself comfortable in the converted study, perfectly content with his temporary quarters and already planning the next day's activities with the children. Finally, as midnight approached and Christmas Eve became Christmas morning, and William found themselves alone in their bedroom, reflecting on the day that had exceeded Evan's highest expectations. "It was perfect," William said, his voice quiet with satisfaction and wonder. "Absolutely perfect." Nodded, feeling the deep contentment that came from dreams realized and love shared. Outside their bedroom window, the cottage garden lay peaceful under a blanket of frost, and somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing to welcome Christmas morning. The weeks of preparation, all the careful planning and attention to detail, had culminated in exactly what it hoped to create. A Christmas celebration that honored tradition while creating new memories, that brought family together in an atmosphere of love and joy, that would become the foundation for Christmases to come. Tomorrow would bring Christmas morning magic, with presents opened around their tree and breakfast shared in the cottage kitchen. There would be walks in the winter garden, games by the fireplace, and the comfortable rhythms of family time. But tonight, as fell asleep in their new family home surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, she felt the profound satisfaction of having created something truly beautiful. Adelaide Cottage had become exactly what she had dreamed, not just a house, but a home where love lived in every carefully chosen detail, where family gathered not out of obligation but out of joy, where Christmas meant connection and celebration and the precious gift of being exactly where you belonged, with exactly the people who mattered most, creating memories that would warm future Christmases for generations to come.